All right, everybody, welcome. I'm Susan Denson-Guy. I'm the executive director at the Emerson. I would normally say welcome to my office or welcome to the Emerson, but right now, welcome to my home office. As this pandemic continues and we spend more and more time together on Zoom, we get to learn the ins and outs of where everybody lives and what their offices and homes look like. Joining us tonight, we also have Tamara Knappenberger, our events and membership coordinator, joining from she's actually in the office right now. And then Courtney's joining us from Missoula in her home, her little den of creativity. Before we go any further this evening and we get a chance to hand it over to Courtney, we'd just like to take a moment. We'd like to pause to acknowledge that the Emerson Center for the Arts and Culture occupies the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Apsáalooke, Salish Kootenai, the Cheyenne. We honor all the indigenous caretakers of these lands, waters, and the elders who live here before, the indigenous of today, and the generations to come. At this time, we'd like to invite each of you to follow the link that we've dropped in chat to share with us the ancestral lands that you're joining us from this evening. So with that, I'm going to allow everybody to turn their cameras off. And I'm going to introduce Courtney, sitting there all matched, just like Prue. So we'll check the bake later to open your keynote. And let's spend some time looking at the amazing works that you have on display now in the Jessie Wilber.
Great. Okay, so I am just sharing my screen now, everybody. And share. Okay. Oh, okay, here's our first hiccup, everybody. Hold on one sec. Here we go. Okay, so welcome to my talk about A Year Without a Summer. These are geographic and narrative drawings that I've done based on a eruption that happened in Sumbawa in Indonesia. So actually the photos that are up on the side of my screen here are interrupting my ability to see my words. So I'm just going to read it from my screen down here. I'm sorry about that. In April of 1815, the volcano Tambora erupted on the island of Sumbawa in Indonesia and is considered the third largest volcanic eruption in recorded history. Aside from causing total devastation to the surrounding area, this eruption had global repercussions as volcanic gases caused a worldwide aerosol cloud that clogged up the sky. In the year that followed, climate anomalies were recorded around the world. The volcanic winter and subsequent effects on European and North American crops caused 1816 to be known as the Year Without a Summer. This eruption gave rise to a whole host of events that spanned from the horrific and tragic to the literary and cultural. The birth of modern climate science, the birth of modern meteorology, the opening of the Northwest Passage, the advent of the Chinese opium trade, the birth of Gothic horror, and American westward expansion are just some of the amazing things that can be directly linked to the eruption of Volcano Tambora. These drawings link together the far-reaching effects of the eruption and demonstrate the global impact of this singular event, as well as making a connection to our current man-made climate state. So in the process of doing this, I started with the genesis of this eruption, and this was kind of how I organized my process. This initial piece is called Zaman Hujin Ah, and I'm not pronouncing that correctly, I'm sure, but I'm doing my best. And that means time of the ash rain in the Indonesian dialect. And all these works that you're going to be seeing are pen and marker on paper, and they're quite large, most of them. This one is 40 inches by 50 inches. So when you're looking at this, you'll see on the right-handed side, you'll see the notes that I took about the event, and you'll also see my initial sketch, and then you'll see the final work on the left side. I do want to mention, first of all, when you're looking at these pieces, everything in this work has meaning, and every object, every little mark, every single thing means something. And I don't think this is the time for me to talk about what everything means, but I just want to make you all aware that there is intention behind everything, and it all relates to one another. This piece explores the actual eruption that happened in 1815, and it talks about kind of what my narrative viewpoint of what happened was. There's not a lot of firsthand accounts of this event, and it wiped out the entire island of Sumbawa, and all the people that lived there at the time are no longer, there's no ancestors of those people even, because they were all wiped out. But because there was somebody on a neighboring island of Java who's the figure with the little orangutan wearing the sailor suit, he was able to have a firsthand account because he sent relief ships over from the island of Java. And I think I'm maybe babbling a little bit, so maybe I need to have a little bit of direction.
I think you're doing great, Courtney.
Okay.
So say that on the picture, and I was going to try the annotate mode just to see if I could get it to go.
Yeah.
So with this, can you tell us a little bit about this gentleman here?
Yeah, so that's Sir Stamford Raffles, and he was a lieutenant governor on Java. He was a British officer, and he was a naturalist. He was a military man, a naturalist. He went on to do some really amazing things later in his career, which I will talk about more specifically when we talk about the cast of characters next week. But he was kind of the first person account that we have of the eruption of Tambora. And in some ways, without him, it might not have been as well known or as well documented. He did send help. It was for naught, because by the time the ships got there, the eruption was so large and so devastating that the people that did survive were very few. They were on one side of the island that wasn't hit as hard as the other side, and but he did end up interviewing one of them, who was the Raja, and the Raja is depicted by the character who's flying off the island, sort of the centaur looking character. He was the Raja who, yes, exactly, who did end up, he did survive, but he did lose his life later on due to disease related to the explosion. Now, I'm not a scientist, and I'm not a meteorologist, so I'm not going to be able to explain this in terms that are extremely scientific, but the aerosol gases that came out of the eruption of Tambora were such that they shot up into the atmosphere, and they kind of mingled up there for quite a long time. And as they mingled, they spread across the entire globe. And for about 9 months or so, they blanketed the earth. And the following summer, which was the summer of 1816, became known as the year without a summer. And that's when the eruption of Tambora in 1815 actually affected the entire globe. And when I say the entire globe, I will just mention that there are accounts that there are places that didn't record weather, that weren't, there's big gaps. Australia, Africa, the Arctic, there's places that don't have any mention. So I've done my best to talk about the places that had actual records of what happened.
Courtney, your next couple slides show some detailed close-ups of this particular image. Work. How about if you click through,
go ahead,
and that'll let you share the story that way. And as you're clicking, I think one of the things that was fascinating to me is that, all artists find inspiration in different places. But one of the things that you mentioned is that your inspiration for this entire project came from text.
That's right. Yeah, I don't know that I'm in the minority when I think I'm in the minority when I say as an artist that I'm generally more inspired by words and text than I am by visual things. And that's, I think, always been the way that I've been. I think it's why as a young person, I went into illustration as my point of focus. And so initially what brought me to this project was I went on vacation and I brought a stack of books with me, and one of them was a book about Tambora. And at first I wasn't sure if I found it too interesting. And then I hit on a section that talked about the notion that Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein, and it was related to this year without a summer, and that without the year without a summer, she might not have written it. And that just hooked me. And from that point, I just kind of, I was in, and I just went kind of mad with research. And I think in some ways the research phase for me is as exciting as the part where I get to do the work. I spent about 6 months researching, and then I spent about 3 months actually doing the work, which when you see it all together is kind of a lot of work in that short a period of time. But I was so immersed in it that I think it just poured out of me by then. And now I'm showing you a screen of kind of just so you guys can get an idea of how dense these works are. This is a kind of an educational pamphlet that shows everything that's in this work. And I'm not going to pull these up because it would be hard to read them all. But I did just want to mention that you can see them if you're in the gallery. They're also on my website. And my good friend John, who is here in the talk, did them for me, and they're fantastic. So that's that. I don't know if we should just move on, and hopefully we can fill in all the blanks. So this is the next piece in the series. And this piece goes from the island of Sumbawa in 1815 to the summer of 1816. And I consider this a geographical portrait. It starts on the left-handed side. It starts in Indonesia. And if you look in the very left, you'll see the Raja that I spoke about before with his daughter who's dying from drinking poisoned water. It travels up to China, where you see the rice fields. It goes down to India, where cholera was just starting to form. And this is sort of the beginning of what would become a multi-year long cholera epidemic. It goes to Switzerland, where the centerpiece of Mary Shelley, Lord Byron, Percy Shelley, I can't remember his middle name. I'm sorry, guys. And a few other people are staying at a villa in Switzerland, where they've sort of birthed modern Gothic horror. It goes to Italy, England, Ireland, where typhus is starting to take hold of people. And then it ends in America, where Thomas Jefferson, he's an important figure, mostly because he was really the first person who said, I think recording weather is super important. I think it means something to our understanding of what our world is like. And so he'd been keeping accurate weather records for many, many years before this event. And he was able to kind of go back and say, according to my records, we're having a crazy summer. And the anecdotes I could tell you about what was happening are just innumerable. So I don't know that I need to tell you too many of those specifics, but maybe we could talk about them later. I will just mention that this wasn't common knowledge what was happening. Nobody really understood it. And so what people thought was happening was the end of the world. I mean, headlines across the world, particularly in Europe, because that's where we get most of our records from in this period of time, and then America, are saying like the world is ending. So the title of the piece, Details sur la fin du monde, is the title of a newspaper that was published at that time. And this piece is huge. It's 8 feet. It's pen and marker and oil pastel, which is also nuts in some ways, because it's very tiny details within this. So
Courtney,
yeah.
tell us a little bit about the part that I found fascinating about this, other than Mary Shelley and Lord Byron holed up in the villa in Switzerland. But up here in the upper right-hand corner, there's this gentleman painting.
Yes. Yep. So that's J.M.W. Turner, and he's considered the painter of the skies. And he was painting, I do now think I wish that I put a sample of his painting in here for you all to see, but he was painting these skies that were unbelievably dark and weird and red and orange and not pleasant looking, but he was painting what he saw. And I think this is what really hooked me into this project additionally, was looking at the art that was made during that time. And if you don't understand what the project is about, or you don't look at his works and think this is he's painting some climate anomaly that doesn't make sense. You think he's being atmospheric or he's being impressionistic, but no, he was being very accurate to what people were seeing in Europe at the time. And so reading back, like if you read the work that Byron wrote during this summer, if you read what Percy Shelley was writing, he wrote Ozymandias. If you read the works of these people during this period of time through the filter of understanding that people thought the world was ending and they saw starvation and things that they'd never seen in the course of their life, famine, disease, you reread their work with a really amazing new light, I think.
And Courtney, can you share? I thought you said something like during this year, it was the year that the most red pigment was used in any other moment in art history, really.
Yeah, and that was according to the book Tambora that I read by Gillen Darcy Wood, which was kind of I would say my Bible for this. He said that during this period they did, is it X-rays that they do of the work or scans of the work? From this period of time, the most red was used for landscape painters. And that just goes to show that what they were seeing was just really grim. And I did also read that a lot of people were blaming it on all kinds of different reasons, religious reasons. There was a rumor that if Benjamin Franklin hadn't been messing around with electricity experiments, then this wouldn't have happened. I think it's hard because there wasn't a global network that people could kind of look to get a source of information, like people were really left with no understanding of what was happening. Should I go to a few of, so this is my sketch. So it's hard to know how small my writing is from this, but it's really tiny. And I wrote a lot. I mean, for me, note taking is probably the most important part of my process. And you'll also see that the sketch is pretty much exactly what you saw previously. And here are some detail shots. So you'll see Byron at the Villa Diodati, and I'm probably butchering that as well, but he takes tea with death, which is sort of my poetic way of talking about Byron. And I just wanted to read, if I can find it, I just wanted to read just the first paragraph of the poem he wrote during this period. And you'll get a sense, think about what he was seeing when he looked out over this villa. It's from the poem Darkness. I had a dream, which was not all a dream. The bright sun was extinguished and the stars did wander darkly in the eternal space, rayless and pathless, and the icy earth swung blind and blackening in the moonless air. Morn came and brought no day, and men forgot their passions in the dread of this their desolation, and all hearts were chilled into a selfish prayer for light. So he was really looking out at the world and seeing what was happening. And I think if you don't know what the story is, you just think he's being typical Byron poet, but I mean, he was being honest about what he was seeing. And I found that fascinating and illuminating. So you'll see in the little Benjamin Franklin thing that he has his little weather taking instrument. And also you'll see a more close up of JMW Turner painting the skies. And then this pattern at the bottom, which will pop up in, I think 3 or 4 of my pieces. Yep, that is cholera plankton, and it's what cholera would look like under a microscope. And of course I gave it an artsy twist, maybe a little brighter than it might be otherwise, but that is my sort of visual indication that cholera is starting to seep up from the ground, and it's going to start infecting the world. So I think there's somebody who needs to be admitted to the waiting room, or admitted to that. Okay, sorry. Okay, so that I don't know if I should. Here's a few in progress shots, and I think this maybe gives you a sense of the scale of it, if you haven't seen it in person, and sort of the way that I go about things, which is, maybe not exactly methodical, but I do sketch everything out and put pen in there. And then you'll see in the middle shot that those are the markers I use, which perform a lot like watercolor, in my opinion, and are quite forgiving. And yeah, and I would say this piece took me about 350 hours or so. So not an insignificant part of amount of time. Should I move on to the next piece?
There you go. Yeah.
Okay, great. So that's once it was done and somebody was filming it. Okay, so this next piece deals directly with the actual event at the villa where Mary Shelley, her soon-to-be husband, Percy Shelley, Lord Byron, his Dr. John Polidori, and Mary Shelley's sister, Claire Claremont, were staying. And now normally for this group of people, they would be, vacationing at a villa and then be taking walks and boating and so forth. But they were caught inside during this period. And they were imbibing and partaking in lots of drinking and perhaps some other things like laudanum. And their nights got weirder and weirder. And that is when they started to sort of say, let's outdo each other with ghost stories. And this is where Mary Shelley had her idea for Frankenstein. And it's absolutely fascinating. And I will talk much more about Mary Shelley in next week's talk, so I won't go too into it. But this piece is quite a bit smaller. If you have any questions about it, we can go back to it. But I'll just kind of fly through these.
Courtney, before you click off of this one, because it's the big question, and with the tour that we've had in the gallery so far, of course, we know that the breasts.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Okay. Yeah.
Probably need a little explanation.
Yeah. Percy Shelley, one night under the influence, he hallucinated Mary Shelley having eyes for nipples, and he fell backward in a state of panic and horror. Who knows if this is real? I mean, these people were all extremely dramatic, but yeah, I wanted to indicate that because it was such a great story. And in addition to wanting to do justice to the historical aspect, I also wanted some fun elements. And to me, that's pretty fun.
I think that's a pretty fun one. And I think kind of the incestuous is the wrong word, but there was a lot of frivolity between the players.
The title of the piece, The League of Incest, is what the people who were in the other summer houses on the lake were calling them. I mean, this was a group of people that were it's like modern day celebrities. Like every move they made was pretty interesting to the world. I mean, Mary Shelley, she already had a child with Percy, and they weren't quite married yet. Claire Clairmont was pregnant out of wedlock with Byron's baby at the time. John Polidori, who was Byron's doctor, was in love with Mary Shelley. It was a lot going on in this group. And Percy Shelley is a well-known lover of everybody. He's a lover, but he also really loved animals. And so even staying at this summer house, he managed to adopt a bunch of cats because he couldn't resist himself with animals. So that's kind of what that piece is. And here are a few of the details a little bit closer up. In the right-hand side, you'll see their little son is sleeping. I can't imagine that must have been an interesting young childhood for him. This next piece relates more to sort of the political cartoons at the time, and then what was happening, the way that we see politics now and leaders, and how they don't seem to care as much for the little people. And that's sort of what that piece is about. And I think for the smaller pieces, I might just kind of go through them. We can talk about them after. You'll see a little bit. I really did pull from the political cartoons at the time were very scathing and hilarious. And some of these are directly kind of taken from those. This piece is about well-known people who were children at the time of The Year Without a Summer. So on the left-handed side is Mary Anning, who was a famous female fossil collector. On the laying across on the pastoral landscape is Joseph Smith, who is the founder of Mormonism, whose family migrated up to New York during this period of time because in where he lived was the crops were failing. Charles Dickens, who was living in the heart of just the London at the time was just absolutely ravaged by death and disease. And then also Charles Darwin, who was a little young, but I still think it's possible that this whole thing might have influenced him. So this piece is a little bit of a conjecture on my part, that, these people who I think are really interesting and who went on to do pretty unique things might have been influenced by this event. So you'll see a little bit closer. And then we get to the second sort of centerpiece of my entire project, which is Poetry of the Seven Sorrows. So the first centerpiece that big drawing that we saw, which was Detail sur la fin du monde, started in the East and traveled west to America. And this one starts in America and travels back east to Indonesia. And this takes place basically after that period of the summer and then goes into the 1830s and beyond. So I kind of travel the globe again, but I talk a little bit more about sort of post Year Without a Summer, what was still happening that can kind of be traced to the event. The centerpiece of this is this masquerade ball. And should I start with talking about what the poetry of the Seven Sorrows was? Do you think that would help a little bit?
Either way, Courtney, whatever works best for you. I find this one is so fascinating to hear about. So, but I think that connection to the Seven Sorrows probably plays well.
Yeah. So one of the places that was really suffering a lot from the effects of the Year Without a Summer and the subsequent famine and crop failure was the Yunnan province of China. And we only kind of know this because there was a poet named Li Yu Yang, and actually he was a scholar who became a farmer. He moved back to his family to the Yunnan province to farm rice. And then he became a poet. And he revived this poetry form called the poetry of the Seven Sorrows. And the Seven Sorrows are the 5 senses plus the twin, oh gosh darn it, I think it's bitterness and justice are the other 2. I had it in my head and now it's just gone this way, but I think it's bitterness and justice. And he revived it and he wrote poems that were directly related to what was happening in his world. And because of the collapse of the rice crop, you can kind of trace the opium wars. The farmers turned from their rice crops to opium. A lot of them became addicted to their opium crops. And then, by the time that Year Without a Summer ended, there was a lot more transport of opium into Europe. So the poetry of the Seven Sorrows is really related to what was happening in China. And so there's 7 skeletons kind of doing a dance of the Seven Sorrows. And this is a little bit wordy, but this particular passage is exactly it's a firsthand account of cholera entering Europe and the actual effects of it. And it's by a writer named Heinrich Heine. He was a journalist. And so I'll try to make it quick, but I think this is a really important passage to understand what it was like to live in this period and people not understanding that cholera was a disease that you could get from water. So here I go. Cholera's presence in Paris became official on the 29th of March, 1832, the start of Mi-Carême, a festive weekend marking the middle of Lent with revelry, sumptuous costumes, and processions. The weather was bright and sunny, and Parisians streamed merrily to the boulevards to gawk at the merrymakers in their costumes. Their masks were monstrous caricatures of the livid color and sickly mien of victims of the cholera, mocking both the disease itself and the revelers' fear of it. Such bravado notwithstanding, the public balls were fuller than ever that evening, with insane peals of laughter periodically drowning out the roar of the music. People grew hotter and hotter whilst dancing the can-can, swallowing ices and cold drinks with abandon. Then, all of a sudden, the gayest of the harlequins felt a strange chill in his limbs and took off his mask, whereupon, to the amazement of all, his face was seen to be the violet blue. It was soon found that this was not a joke, and the laughter ceased. Soon thereafter, several carriages began conveying men and women from the ball to the Hotel Dieu, the central hospital, where, still dressed in their masquerade costumes, the victims died in rapid succession. Patients already in the hospital, fearing contagion, shrieked in terror, with the result that the victims from the ball were hastily buried in their costumes, now lying in their graves as merrily as they lived. So you can kind of get the sense of like that this was happening like really quickly. Like people were dropping. And this was really when people started to investigate and understand where cholera came from. So that's really the centerpiece. And there's so much to talk about in this piece, but I know that we don't have a ton of time. So maybe I can go through. And so anyway, suffice to say, the centerpiece is really the story of that Harlequin ball.
And this is also when we see the representation of cholera make an appearance again, right?
Yeah, and now the cholera is starting to bubble up towards the people. And it's much more present. Before it was bubbling under the surface, and now it's right in the center of people's lives. Meanwhile, typhus had been ravaging lots of parts of the world, but because it was I'm putting this in only ravaging people of a lower class, it wasn't given much thought. But now that cholera was seen taking over and affecting people of all walks of life, a lot more attention was paid to it. I will just say that one of the cool things that happened during this period, for not a cool reason, was in Germany. And I can't remember his name, so maybe John remembers and he can type it in the chat. But there was a man who invented a prototype of the bicycle because people were forced to eat their horses often. Transport was not easy to get by. And so he made this sort of prototype of a bicycle, which is one of the cool things that happened. So, and then if you go to the bottom, well, anyway, it ends, the piece kind of ends with the sort of caldera of Mount Tambora being totally unpopulated since everybody was wiped out. And you can see another sort of page of my sketches and all my notes. Oh yes, so touch, sight, hearing, taste, smell, injustice, and bitterness. Those are the 7 sorrows. I've made a note for myself here. Here are a few of the details. The bottom left is where you'll see the caldera of Mount Tambora and no life on it. And I will go forward. Some in progress shots as I did it. And then should I move on to the next piece?
Yes.
Okay. And I only have 2 more and I'll try to make this fast. So this is a piece that jumps well into the future, but it's about the Donner Party. And it is basically the journey of the group of people who ended up, and I don't think I need to explain the Donner Party. I am assuming everybody knows, but I just wanted to kind of talk about, you know, because of the year without a summer and then events that sort of happened with famine and loss of crops and the weather, and people started to move west. And I think the Donner Party, you know, this is one of the results of that, although further into the future. So that's what this piece is basically about. It's also quite big. It's 40 by 50. I'll just go on through that one. Here's
Courtney,
some of
one of the things you said about this that you shared that I thought was interesting is a lot of times when we think of the Donner Party, we think exclusively of adults.
Yeah, and it was not, I mean, her name was Virginia, and I can't remember her last name, but the person that I really was drawn to when making this piece was this young girl, Virginia, and she survived. She lived to be 88, and she was, if there is a hero in the world, this little girl was a hero. She actually when they were stuck in the big salt flats, she actually sewed some of her heirloom toys and books into her dress so nobody could find them. And so she could keep them close to her. When they were making one of the journeys from where they were trapped at the lake, she was part of the party that was trying to get through, and her little brother couldn't make it. She walked back with him and stayed there alone with him and survived off of twigs and boiled leather until people could come back for her. And later on in her life, she said that she made it through because she prayed to God that she would become a Catholic. And when she became an adult, she became a Catholic for the rest of her life, which I thought was a pretty interesting thing. But I think her journey is just so interesting. And I didn't want to talk too much about the cannibalism. I wanted to keep that a little bit more, because that part is the real sensational part, or sensationalized part of it. And I think the story is more about survival and the, you know, and the little, I just want to mention the little elephant. And so in the newspapers at the time, they were using seeing the elephant as a way to advertise the excitement that could be found in the West. Like, perhaps you'll see an elephant. They did not see an elephant. So here's a few in progress shots. And yeah, and so this is the final piece. And this piece is a modern piece about sort of what happens, like what is happening now. But I use the same idea of the 7 sorrows, but I use the 7 deadly sins. So every one of these characters in here is representing a deadly sin. And then I also, in the bottom right corner, you'll see Sumbawa, which is now, it is populated. It's a poor country, whereas in 1815, it was much more of a wealthy isn't the right word, but it was a well-traveled country, well-traveled island. Now it's quite devastated financially, and so forth. And so I've taken a lot of the ideas about climate and the things that were happening in 1815 and 1816, and I brought them into a modern world. So that's sort of what this piece is about. Here are some of the little details. I can't point, but the girl laying down is, gosh darn it, I should know all of these. I can never remember. She is Sloth.
So this is the connection to the 7 deadly sins, correct?
Yeah. So this is the connection to the 7 deadly sins and kind of the connection to the 7 sorrows. So I wanted to take the ancient poetry form of 7 sorrows and relate it to, the modern world. So I will just get us all kerfuffled if I try to remember who's who, because I remember at the opening we were trying to remember who was what was what, but yeah, so these are some in progress shots of it. And should I go to that slide now?
Courtney, go back one slide.
Okay.
So on this one, on the image that's on the left again,
Yeah.
just to make this connection one more time.
Yeah. So now cholera has become, a pattern for a designer dress. That's sort of the genesis of it. Some artisan has taken it and made it into fashion. And yeah, that's that's like the major way that it's kind of related to this as well. So.
And I think as we talked about this, so you represented the 7 deadly sins here. Do you want to explain which each one is, or is that too much pressure? I don't want to ask you off guard.
Yeah. So I for some reason can never remember them all, but how about we go to, I think I can say it. I think I can do it. Okay. So the girl on the horse.
Oops, hang on. Yep.
Yeah. She is lust. And I was thinking of like war horse kind of, lust, and also kind of a sex robot lust. The children next to her are pride, and the man holding the globe, injecting it, holding a pile of $100 or $100 bills is greed. The lady lying down is sloth. The lady in the pool is gluttony. Yep. The lady with the green envy strings is envy. And then what's the last one?
Is it sloth? Do we do sloth?
No. Oh my goodness.
Anybody
I
in
don't
chat have the seven?
Yeah, why
sins?
can't I remember the last one?
Jealousy,
Jealousy. Yes, right?
wrath.
Wrath. She's wrath. So that's kind of the breakdown of those. And I did not mention this, and this is actually quite important, and then I will not talk anymore. But the title of this poem is Welcome to the Pleasure Dome. And that's a poem by Samuel Taylor Coleridge, who was a poet at the time. And I just want to, if I can find it in my notes, and I cannot find it in my notes, but it is amazing. Oh, here we go. Oh no. So the poem itself is called Kubla Khan. So I just want to read really quickly the first paragraph. In Xanadu, the Kubla Khan, a stately pleasure dome decree, where Elf, the sacred river, ran through caverns measureless to man down to a sunless sea. So twice 5 miles of fertile ground with walls and towers were girdled round, and there were gardens bright with sinuous rills, where blossomed many an incense-bearing tree, and here were forests ancient as the hills, enfolding sunny spots of greenery. So I use this poem kind of as a basis for this piece, which I should have said at the beginning, but I forgot.
You did great.
Thanks.
So
Okay.
Courtney, as you switch over to your question and answer slide,
Yeah.
Amanda is asking, how much time a day do you put into the actual labor of your work? And do you keep a daily schedule?
So for this project, I did something that I don't always do, which is I was able to take 3 months off completely, and I worked just tirelessly on this. So for this particular project, I would say I was working 20 hours a day, and that's not an exaggeration. On the regular, I would say that I work all my waking hours, but it's not always on the actual craft of drawing, just because the business of being, because my main job really is being an illustrator, and I do a lot of commissions and illustration projects. I don't really I'm pretty loosey-goosey with my projects or with my schedule, but I do just work. I have a real internal drive, even if I don't keep a schedule. I would like to, if I could spend all my time just drawing and have a manager who took care of all my business stuff, I would be really thrilled. So I would say when it's a good day, then I get to spend 8 to 10 hours on the actual art. When it's a normal day, it's more like I would say 50-50, maybe 6 hours doing things that are for future projects business-wise, and then 6 to 8 hours actually doing the drawing. So it's a hard balance. But for this project, I got to just work without any distractions, which was probably my favorite thing that ever happened in my life. Exhausting, but yeah.
12-hour days are not a great sale for becoming an artist. That's
no,
and
I mean that's 12 hours. That's 12 hours to be conservative. I mean, I wake up and I don't think about much else, and I don't say that in a oh poor me, because I love it. This is who I am. This is my passion. But it is not for the faint of heart in some ways. I sort of sometimes feel like I'm sending emails or starting to draw before I've even opened my eyes, which says something about me also. But
Courtney Mac is asking, do you ever feel like giving up?
Oh my gosh, no. Every once in a while I'll think it would be really easy it would be neat to just have a job where I just worked 9 to 5 and then went home and didn't think about work. But I can't imagine it. I've been working for myself since the beginning of 2009. And I can't imagine any other possibility for myself. But at the beginning, when I first tried this as a career, it was exhausting. I didn't know if I could do it. So yeah, I did want to give up maybe a little bit, but I always had that internal push.
So Courtney, we have a few more minutes. I just want to remind folks, if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. But Courtney, I wanted to ask you, in visiting with you and looking at the work and then looking at your slides about process, I find it fascinating that you are text motivated. You're fine.
Yeah.
You're fine.
Sorry.
But I think the other thing that was really interesting is in a couple of your process slides, you've got your work in front of you and all of your markers, and then you've got the TV sitting to the side.
Yeah. For me, because I spend such huge amounts of time on work, and so here's the thing. I do a lot of the creative part of my process in the note taking, in the sketching. And so once I get to my actual final piece, a lot of the work has been done. And so I can just kind of let my sort of knowledge of drawing and my knowledge of color kind of take over organically, and I can kind of space out and watch TV, which sounds crazy. But I think when I'm spending 20 hours alone drawing every day for 3 months, it's my company, it's what keeps me kind of like, I need another voice in my head. Or to be honest, when you're doing projects that are that huge, there's a huge level of boredom and you get bored. You're sick of drawing cholera, or you don't want to, you're sick of drawing bricks on a building for 10 hours. So there had to be something that kind of kept me distracted or kept me thinking about something else, I guess.
I found it fascinating because you said that you had the television or whatever playing, but then your work, the actual drawing, you just kind of went to a different place in your brain and you drew from that place.
Yeah, I've always found that that's my way of connecting with my work in a way that is another facet of my brain, and it just leads me places that I don't know that I could get to just with when I'm putting all my attention into something. It just becomes it's just like a mechanical process that like I feel like I'm out of body with. And I think that's why I love sort of what I do, because I can get to these other places in my brain that I really like.
Courtney, Michaela asked, as you're doing sketches, do you take notes? I think we think yes. Or do you think of a topic for your piece and do research and then start your sketch for your work?
Yeah, so that's a great question. The note taking for me is the most important part. So everything that I do, it's just like my project notebook for this was mostly notes, I would say. And based on those notes, it's like I make a list of like everything I want to have in there. And then it becomes like a little check mark. Like, okay, don't forget the monkeys on the right doing this. Don't forget this palm tree species. So for me, the note taking is really important. Not all my projects are historically based, but it is one of my favorite ways to make work, even though I'm not a historian and not a scientist. But yeah, so
we're grateful for that. And just sharing, Amanda said, I like to listen to stand-up comedy in the studio. I figure the distraction is no more than you would spend socializing with a coworker.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I think it's just nice to have a distraction, it helps. I think that's like, for me, what it comes down to is like, when you're committing yourself to a project that's going to take, thousands of hours, I need something else to be happening that helps me to, if I go, okay, well, I'll watch 2 more episodes of this show tonight and that'll get me to 5 a.m. It gives me this sort of locking in point where I can just go, you can do it. You can do it for a few more hours. Come on.
So Courtney, we have time for one more question. And Shelley's asking, was there any historic information about what happened in Mexico or Latin America at that time?
That is one region that I saw nothing about. And that's why it's such a bummer. There's so much missing from the lower hemisphere. And I would love to know more about that. All the books that I've looked at have never mentioned any of those regions. I can only imagine that there must have been changes also. maybe there'll be a future book by some historian who can, or scientist who can figure that out. And then there'll be a part 2 to my project.
And another, what, 3 months of just
Right.
constant.
Another 3 months of insane workload.
Courtney, thanks so much. Thanks for
Yeah.
sharing your work, your time with us. Thanks for sharing it with us here in the Bozeman community. And for folks locally, please come see the work. All of Courtney's works are be available online, including all of the detail about the work. So you're welcome to delve into our website. If you come into the gallery, we actually have QR codes, so you can queue it up and you can actually have it right on your phone with you as you're going around. I'd also like to invite you to join us on Thursday, October 21st for part 2.
Yes.
So Courtney has the entire Jessie Wilber Gallery filled with this beautiful graphic story, but then the entire lobby gallery is filled with the cast of characters. And she kind of skimmed over them. But if you join us on the 21st, you can learn more about the awesome, eccentric tale that all of these folks and these lives intertwine together, and that Courtney's really beautifully illustrated. So with that, I'd just like to say thank you. Thanks, Courtney, for sharing your time from Missoula. And thank you to everybody that joined us online tonight. Share it with your friends and register again for the 21st. Good night, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.